The morning mist clung to the dense canopy of the Afghan forest as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her tactical gear one final time. The SEAL team had been moving through the treacherous terrain for 3 hours, their mission clear but dangerous. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target was hiding in a compound deep within the mountainous region, and their job was to extract him before enemy forces could relocate him again. Maria wasn't officially part of the SEAL team, but her expertise as a Navy sharpshooter had earned her a spot on this critical operation. The 12-man team moved in perfect formation through the thick undergrowth, their boots making barely a whisper against the forest floor. Team leader Commander Jake Mitchell had briefed them thoroughly about the terrain and potential threats. But something about this mission felt different to Maria. The forest seemed too quiet. Birds that should have been chirping in the early morning hours were silent. Even the usual rustle of small animals through the brush was absent. Maria's instincts, honed through years of combat experience, told her they were walking into something more dangerous than anticipated. She glanced at her rifle, a custom M24 sniper system that had saved her life more times than she could count. As they approached a clearing about 2 miles from their target, Commander Mitchell raised his fist, signaling the team to halt. Through the trees ahead, they could see the outline of the compound where their target was supposedly hiding. It was a modest structure, surrounded by a low stone wall and what appeared to be minimal security. Too minimal, Maria thought as she scanned the surrounding area through her scope. The team spent 20 minutes observing the compound, noting guard positions and potential entry points. Everything seemed routine, almost textbook. But Maria's unease continued to grow. She had learned to trust her gut feelings during her 8 years of military service, and right now, every fiber of her being was screaming that something was wrong. Commander Mitchell gave the signal to move forward. The team began their approach, spreading out in a tactical formation that would allow them to surround the compound quickly and efficiently. Maria took position on a small ridge overlooking the target area, her role to provide overwatch and eliminate any threats that might emerge during the operation. As the team moved closer to the compound, Maria swept the surrounding forest with her scope, looking for any signs of enemy movement. The silence that had bothered her earlier was now overwhelming. Not even the wind seemed to be moving through the trees. She whispered into her radio, informing Commander Mitchell of her concerns, but the response was to continue with the mission as planned. The first sign of trouble came when Maria spotted a glint of metal in the trees about 300 yards to the east of the compound. She focused her scope on the area and felt her blood run cold. There, partially concealed behind a large boulder, was the barrel of what appeared to be a heavy machine gun. She immediately radioed the team, but before she could complete her warning, the forest erupted in gunfire. The ambush was perfectly coordinated. Enemy fighters emerged from concealed positions all around the clearing, their weapons trained on the SEAL team below. Maria watched in horror as her teammates dove for cover behind whatever protection they could find. The compound had been bait, and they had walked directly into the trap. Muzzle flashes lit up the forest from at least a dozen different positions. The enemy had chosen their ambush site well, using the natural terrain to create overlapping fields, a fire that made it nearly impossible for the SEAL team to maneuver. Maria could hear Commander Mitchell shouting orders over the radio, trying to coordinate his team's response while bullets whizzed past their positions. From her elevated position, Maria had a clear view of the entire battlefield. She could see that the enemy fighters significantly outnumbered her team, and their positions were well fortified and strategically placed. The SEALs were pinned down with limited cover, and their situation was deteriorating rapidly. Several team members were already calling out that they were running low on ammunition. Maria knew that without immediate action, her teammates would be overwhelmed. The enemy fighters were beginning to close in, using suppressive fire to keep the SEALs pinned while they moved to more advantageous positions. She could see at least 15 hostiles, all armed with automatic weapons and what appeared to be military-grade equipment. This wasn't a ragtag group of insurgents. These were trained fighters who had planned this ambush carefully. The weight of the situation settled on Maria's shoulders as she realized that her teammates' lives now depended on her actions. She took a deep breath, steadied her rifle, and began to calculate distances and wind patterns. The morning mist that had provided cover during their approach was now lifting, giving her clearer sight lines to the enemy positions. Her hands were steady despite the chaos unfolding below, years of training taking over as she prepared to engage multiple targets in rapid succession. Maria's finger found the trigger as she lined up her first shot. The enemy machine gunner who had given away the ambush was her priority target. She controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow as she entered the focused state that had made her one of the Navy's most effective snipers. The crosshairs settled on the gunner's center mass and she squeezed the trigger with practiced precision. The shot rang out across the forest, and the machine gun immediately fell silent. Maria didn't pause to confirm the hit. She was already moving her rifle to acquire the next target. A fighter positioned behind a fallen log was laying down heavy fire on Petty Officer Rodriguez, who was trapped behind inadequate cover. Maria's second shot found its mark, and Rodriguez was able to move to a better position. The enemy fighters quickly realized they were taking fire from an elevated position and began searching for Maria's location. Several of them redirected their weapons toward the ridge where she was positioned, forcing her to adjust her tactics. She rolled to a new position, using the rocky terrain to mask her movement while maintaining visual contact with the battlefield below. Commander Mitchell's voice crackled over the radio, coordinating his team's response to the ambush. The SEALs were professional fighters, and despite being caught off guard, they were beginning to establish a defensive perimeter. However, their ammunition situation was becoming critical, and the enemy showed no signs of letting up their assault. Maria identified another priority target, a fighter with what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. He was positioning himself to fire on the largest group of pinned-down SEALs, and a successful shot would likely result in multiple casualties. She adjusted her scope for the increased distance and took careful aim. The shot was more challenging due to the angle and the target's partial concealment, but Maria's bullet found its mark just as the fighter was preparing to fire. The psychological impact of losing their heavy weapons operators was beginning to affect the enemy fighters. Their coordinated assault was becoming more scattered as they tried to locate and neutralize the sniper, who was systematically eliminating their key personnel. Maria used this confusion to her advantage, moving between different firing positions and continuing to pick off targets. Petty Officer Chen, the team's communications specialist, managed to establish contact with their base of operations. He relayed their situation and coordinates, requesting immediate air support. However, the nearest helicopter was at least 20 minutes away, and given the intensity of the firefight, 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. Maria's fourth shot eliminated another fighter who was attempting to flank the SEAL team's left side. She was working methodically, prioritizing targets based on the immediate threat they posed to her teammates. Her ammunition supply was limited, and every shot had to count. She couldn't afford to miss or waste rounds on targets that didn't pose an immediate danger. The enemy fighters were becoming increasingly desperate. Their initial advantage was slipping away as Maria continued to thin their ranks and disrupt their coordinated attack. Several of them began focusing their fire on her position, forcing her to remain mobile and making it more difficult to line up precise shots. Despite the incoming fire, Maria maintained her composure. She had been in similar situations before, though never with stakes quite this high. The lives of 12 elite Navy SEALs depended on her ability to continue engaging the enemy and buying them time to either escape or receive reinforcements. The weight of that responsibility could have been overwhelming, but instead, it sharpened her focus. Commander Mitchell's team was beginning to make tactical movements, using the chaos created by Maria's sniper fire to improve their positions. They were still significantly outnumbered and outgunned, but the systematic elimination of key enemy fighters had leveled the playing field somewhat. The SEALs were able to establish better defensive positions and coordinate their return fire more effectively. Maria's radio crackled with updates from her teammates. Several of them were wounded, though none critically, and their ammunition situation remained dire. She could see that the enemy fighters were regrouping, likely preparing for another coordinated assault. Time was running out, and she knew that her continued effectiveness would determine whether her teammates made it home alive. The morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the last of the mist and providing clearer visibility across the battlefield. This worked both for and against Maria. While she could see her targets more clearly, She was also more exposed to return fire. She adjusted her position once again, finding cover behind a large boulder that provided protection while still allowing her to engage targets. As she scanned the forest through her scope, Maria counted at least 8 enemy fighters still in active positions. They were becoming more cautious, using better cover and moving more carefully. Her initial advantage of surprise was gone, and now it would be a test of skill, patience, and ammunition conservation. The real battle was just beginning. The enemy fighters had learned to respect Maria's deadly accuracy, but they were far from defeated. As she watched through her scope, she could see them reorganizing their attack, using hand signals to coordinate a new assault strategy. They were no longer the confident ambushers who had sprung their trap 30 minutes earlier. Now they moved with the careful precision of fighters who knew they were being hunted by a skilled predator. Maria took advantage of a lull in the gunfire to check her ammunition. She had fired 8 rounds and had 12 remaining in her current magazine, with 2 additional magazines in her pack. In a normal engagement, this would be more than sufficient, but nothing about this situation was normal. Every shot had to be perfect, and she couldn't afford to engage targets unless she was certain of a hit. Below in the clearing, Petty Officer Williams was in serious trouble. He had taken a bullet to his leg and was trapped behind a fallen tree trunk that was rapidly being chewed apart by enemy fire. Blood was seeping through his tactical pants, and Maria could see that he was losing strength. She keyed her radio and whispered instructions to him about a more secure position 15 meters to his right, but getting there would require crossing open ground. Maria made the decision to provide covering fire for Williams's movement. She identified 2 enemy fighters who had clear sight lines to his escape route and prepared to engage them simultaneously. It would require rapid target acquisition and perfect shot placement, but it was Williams' only chance. She took a deep breath, lined up her first shot, and began the sequence that would either save her teammate or expose her own position to devastating return fire. Her first bullet found the enemy fighter positioned behind a cluster of rocks, eliminating him instantly. Maria immediately shifted to her second target, a gunman who was partially concealed behind a tree trunk. The angle was difficult, requiring her to thread the bullet through a narrow gap in his cover, but her training took over. The shot was true, and Williams had his opening. The wounded SEAL moved with surprising speed despite his injury, covering the distance to better cover in less than 10 seconds. Maria's covering fire had worked, but it had also revealed her approximate position to the remaining enemy fighters. Almost immediately, she began taking concentrated fire from at least 4 different positions. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around her, and she was forced to retreat deeper into her rocky shelter. Commander Mitchell's voice came over the radio with an update that changed everything. He had managed to contact a nearby Marine patrol that was conducting operations in the region. They were approximately 10 minutes out and moving fast toward the firefight. The news gave the embattled SEAL team new hope, but 10 minutes was an eternity in their current situation. The enemy fighters seemed to sense that time was running out. They launched their most aggressive assault yet, with several fighters attempting to advance while others provided covering fire. Maria could see that they were trying to overrun the SEAL positions before reinforcements arrived. The forest erupted in the most intense gunfire of the entire engagement. From her elevated position, Maria had a clear view of the enemy's assault strategy. 3 fighters were advancing on the right flank, while 2 more provided suppression fire from fixed positions. She quickly prioritized her targets, focusing on the advancing fighters who posed the most immediate threat to her teammates' defensive perimeter. Her 9th shot of the engagement dropped the lead assault fighter, just as he was preparing to throw a grenade into the SEAL positions. The explosive device fell harmlessly to the ground as the fighter collapsed, denying the enemy a potentially devastating attack. Maria immediately shifted to the second advancing fighter, who was now aware that his assault was being disrupted by sniper fire. The enemy fighter attempted to use a large tree for cover, but he had underestimated Maria's skill and patience. She waited for him to expose himself for a clear shot, and when he moved to engage the SEALs below, she was ready. Her 10th bullet ended his advance permanently, leaving only 1 fighter from the assault group still moving forward. The remaining assault fighter was more cautious, using available cover effectively, and advancing in short rushes that made him a difficult target. Maria tracked his movement through her scope, predicting his next position and preparing to intercept him. When he made his next move, she was waiting, Her 11th shot caught him mid-stride, and the enemy's right flank assault collapsed completely. The psychological impact on the remaining enemy fighters was immediate and noticeable. Their coordinated attack had been systematically dismantled by precise sniper fire, and they were now faced with the reality that their ambush had failed. Several of them began showing signs of panic, breaking cover prematurely and exposing themselves to both Maria's fire and the return fire from the SEAL team. Commander Mitchell recognized the shift in momentum and began directing his team to press their advantage. The SEALs started moving more aggressively, using the enemy's confusion to improve their tactical positions. They were still outnumbered, but the balance of power in the engagement was shifting in their favor. Maria could hear the distant sound of helicopter rotors growing louder. The Marine reinforcements were getting closer, and she knew that the enemy fighters would soon be caught between two forces. However, she also knew that desperate fighters could be the most dangerous, and the next few minutes would determine whether her teammates survived to see the rescue helicopters arrive. The sound of approaching helicopters was now unmistakable, and Maria could see the enemy fighters becoming increasingly agitated. They knew their window of opportunity was closing rapidly, and desperation was driving them to take increasingly dangerous risks. Several fighters abandoned their concealed positions and began a desperate final assault, apparently hoping to inflict maximum casualties before the Marines arrived. Maria found herself in the most challenging shooting situation of her career. Multiple targets were moving simultaneously across difficult terrain, while her teammates were engaged in close-quarters combat below. She had to quickly assess which targets posed the greatest immediate threat while avoiding shots that might endanger the SEALs, who were now maneuvering aggressively through the forest. An enemy fighter emerged from behind a large boulder, carrying what appeared to be the team's last rocket-propelled grenade. He was moving directly toward the position where Commander Mitchell and 3 other SEALs had taken cover. Maria knew that a successful RPG shot into that position would likely kill or seriously wound multiple team members. She had to stop him, but the shot would be extremely difficult due to the angle and the fighter's erratic movement pattern. Maria controlled her breathing and led the target, calculating his speed and direction while accounting for the downward angle of her shot. The fighter paused momentarily to aim his weapon, and Maria seized the opportunity. Her 12th shot struck him center mass just as he was preparing to fire, causing the RPG to discharge harmlessly into the forest canopy. The explosion showered the area with debris, but no one was injured. With their heavy weapons eliminated, the remaining enemy fighters were reduced to small arms fire. However, they were far from finished. Maria counted at least 5 fighters still in active positions, and they were beginning to coordinate what appeared to be a final desperate charge toward the SEAL positions. She realized that her elevated position, while providing excellent fields of fire, had also isolated her from the main engagement. The radio crackled with Commander Mitchell's voice directing his team's response to the incoming assault. Maria could see her teammates moving with practiced efficiency, but they were low on ammunition and several were wounded. The next few minutes would determine the outcome of the entire engagement, and she was their primary advantage in what was shaping up to be a final, decisive battle. Maria made a critical decision. Rather than remaining in her sniper's perch, she began moving down the ridge toward the main battlefield. Her teammates needed direct fire support, and she could provide more effective assistance by joining the close-quarters engagement. She secured her sniper rifle and drew her sidearm, preparing for a different type of combat. As she moved through the forest, Maria could hear the intensity of the gunfire increasing. The enemy fighters had committed to their final assault, and the SEALs were giving everything they had to repel it. She navigated through the thick undergrowth as quickly as possible while remaining quiet enough to avoid detection by any enemy fighters who might be positioned between her and her teammates. The first enemy fighter she encountered was moving through the forest parallel to her route, apparently trying to flank the SEAL positions from an unexpected angle. He was focused on the gunfire ahead and didn't notice Maria's approach until it was too late. She neutralized him quickly and quietly, preventing him from reaching a position where he could have caused significant damage to her teammates. Maria continued her movement toward the main engagement, using the natural cover of the forest to mask her approach. She could see muzzle flashes through the trees ahead, and could tell that the fighting was intense. The sound of the helicopters was now very close, suggesting that the Marine reinforcements would arrive within the next few minutes. She reached a position where she could see the main battle clearly. 3 enemy fighters had managed to get within 30 meters of the SEAL positions and were laying down heavy suppressive fire, while a 4th fighter attempted to maneuver for a better shot. The SEALs were returning fire effectively, but their defensive positions were being steadily degraded by the concentrated enemy fire. Maria positioned herself behind a fallen log that provided good cover while offering clear sightlines to the enemy fighters. From this range, her sidearm would be effective, and she could provide direct fire support to her teammates. She could see that Petty Officer Rodriguez had been hit again, this time in the shoulder, but he was still fighting effectively from his position. The helicopter sounds were now overhead, and Maria could see the confusion this was causing among the enemy fighters. They knew that heavily armed Marines would be fast roping into the area within moments, but they were committed to their assault and couldn't easily withdraw without exposing themselves to devastating fire from multiple directions. "Commander," Mitchell's voice came over the radio with instructions for all team members to mark their positions for the incoming Marines. Colored smoke grenades began popping throughout the forest, creating a chaotic but necessary identification system that would prevent friendly fire incidents when the reinforcements arrived. Maria knew that the next 60 seconds would be the most critical of the entire engagement. The enemy fighters were trapped between the SEAL team and the arriving Marines, but cornered fighters were often the most dangerous. She prepared for what she expected would be the most intense minute of combat in her military career. The first Marine helicopter appeared through the forest canopy, and Maria watched as combat-ready Marines began fast roping down into the clearing adjacent to the firefight. The enemy fighters, realizing they were about to be caught in a deadly crossfire, made their final desperate push toward the SEAL positions. The intensity of their assault increased dramatically as they committed everything they had left to breaking through the defensive perimeter. Maria found herself in the perfect position to support her teammates during this crucial moment. From her new position behind the fallen log, she had clear shots at the enemy fighters who were focusing their attention on the original SEAL positions. She began engaging targets systematically, using her sidearm with the same precision she had demonstrated with her sniper rifle. Her first shot from the new position struck an enemy fighter who was preparing to throw a grenade into Commander Mitchell's position. The fighter dropped the explosive device at his own feet, causing a small explosion that eliminated him and temporarily disrupted the assault. Maria immediately shifted to her next target, a gunman who was advancing on Petty Officer Chen's position. The arriving Marines quickly assessed the situation and began establishing their own firing positions around the perimeter of the engagement area. Their heavy weapons and superior numbers immediately began to tip the balance of the firefight. Maria could see the enemy fighters beginning to realize that their situation had become hopeless. But they continued fighting with the desperation of cornered animals. Commander Mitchell coordinated with the Marine unit leader to ensure that the two forces didn't accidentally engage each other in the chaos of the battle. The SEALs continued to maintain their defensive positions, while the Marines systematically closed off all escape routes for the enemy fighters. The coordination between the two units was impressive, demonstrating the high level of training and professionalism of both groups. Maria engaged 2 more enemy fighters, who were attempting to break contact and escape through the forest. Her shots were accurate and decisive, preventing them from reaching the tree line where they might have been able to disappear into the thick vegetation. She was operating at the peak of her abilities, her years of training and combat experience, combining to make her devastatingly effective in the close-quarters engagement. The sound of automatic weapons fire began to diminish, as the enemy fighters were systematically eliminated or forced to surrender. Maria could see white cloth being waved from one of the enemy positions, indicating that at least some of the fighters were ready to give up. The Marines moved carefully to secure these positions while maintaining cover in case the surrender attempt was a deception. Petty Officer Williams, despite his leg wound, had managed to maintain his position throughout the entire engagement and was now providing covering fire for the Marines as they moved to secure the area. His dedication and courage under fire exemplified the spirit of the entire SEAL team, who had fought brilliantly despite being caught in a well-planned ambush. Maria maintained her position and continued to scan for any remaining threats, Her tactical awareness remained high even as the immediate danger seemed to be passing. She had seen too many engagements where a single overlooked enemy fighter had caused casualties during the cleanup phase, and she wasn't going to let her guard down until the area was completely secure. The Marine medics quickly moved to treat the wounded SEALs. Petty Officer Rodriguez's shoulder wound was more serious than initially apparent, and he needed immediate medical attention. Williams' leg wound was also significant, but both men were conscious and alert. The fact that no SEALs had been killed in the ambush was remarkable given the initial disadvantage they had faced. Commander Mitchell moved through the positions to check on his team members and coordinate with the Marine unit leader. The professionalism and effectiveness of the response had been exceptional, but he knew that the mission wasn't over yet. They still needed to search the compound that had been used as bait for the ambush, and there was always the possibility of additional enemy forces in the area. Maria finally received the all-clear signal and began to relax slightly. She had fired her sniper rifle 12 times and her sidearm 6 times during the engagement, and every shot had been effective. Her marksmanship had been the decisive factor that had prevented the ambush from becoming a massacre. The systematic elimination of key enemy fighters had disrupted their coordination and bought precious time for the reinforcements to arrive. As she gathered her equipment and prepared to rejoin her teammates, Maria reflected on the engagement. The enemy had planned their ambush well and had executed it effectively, but they had failed to account for the presence of a skilled sniper in an overwatch position. That single oversight had cost them their advantage and ultimately led to their defeat. The Marines began the process of securing the battlefield and collecting intelligence from the fallen enemy fighters. Early indications suggested that this had been a well-equipped and well-trained group, not the typical insurgent fighters they usually encountered. This raised questions about who had organized the ambush and whether it was part of a larger enemy operation in the region. The aftermath of the engagement revealed the true scope of what Maria and her teammates had faced. Intelligence specialists who arrived with the second wave of reinforcements determined that the ambush had been planned by a highly sophisticated enemy network that had been tracking SEAL operations in the region for weeks. The fake compound and the coordinated positioning of fighters demonstrated a level of planning and resources that went far beyond typical insurgent capabilities. Maria found herself at the center of the debrief session that took place at the forward operating base later that day. Military analysts wanted to understand exactly how a single sniper had been able to disrupt such a well-planned ambush. Her detailed account of the engagement, combined with ballistics analysis and battlefield evidence, painted a picture of extraordinary marksmanship under extreme pressure. The wounded team members, Rodriguez and Williams, were evacuated to a military hospital in Germany for treatment. Both men would make full recoveries, but their injuries served as a reminder of how close the entire team had come to disaster. Without Maria's intervention from her overwatch position, the casualty count would almost certainly have been much higher. Commander Mitchell submitted a detailed after-action report that highlighted Maria's exceptional performance during the engagement. Her ability to maintain accuracy and tactical awareness while under fire had been the deciding factor in the team's survival. The systematic elimination of key enemy fighters had disrupted their coordination and prevented them from overwhelming the SEAL positions with superior numbers. The intelligence gathered from the battlefield proved invaluable in understanding the enemy network that had planned the ambush. Documents and equipment recovered from the site revealed connections to a larger terrorist organization that was operating throughout the region. The failed ambush had actually provided military intelligence with crucial information about enemy capabilities and planning methods. Maria's actions during the engagement earned her widespread recognition within the military community. Her superiors recommended her for several commendations, including the Silver Star for gallantry in action. The award citation specifically noted her courage, skill, and tactical brilliance in turning a potential disaster into a decisive victory for American forces. The story of the forest ambush became a case study at military academies and training facilities. Instructors used the engagement to teach lessons about the importance of overwatch positions, the value of precision marksmanship, and the way individual soldiers could influence the outcome of entire operations. Maria's performance demonstrated how proper training and calm decision-making under pressure could overcome even the most disadvantageous tactical situations. 6 months after the engagement, Maria received word that the intelligence gathered from the ambush site had led to the capture of several high-ranking terrorist leaders. The disruption of their network had prevented multiple planned attacks against coalition forces and had significantly degraded their operational capabilities in the region. Her actions in the forest had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate survival of her teammates. The bond between Maria and the SEAL team members she had saved remained strong long after their return to the United States. They maintained regular contact, and several team members credited her with saving not just their lives, but their ability to return home to their families. The mutual respect and camaraderie that developed from shared combat experience created relationships that would last for decades. Commander Mitchell later described Maria's performance as the finest example of individual heroism under fire that he had witnessed in his military career. Her ability to remain calm and effective while her teammates were in mortal danger demonstrated the highest qualities of military service. The precision of her marksmanship and the tactical intelligence of her decisions had transformed a potential tragedy into a victory. Years later, when Maria had moved on to other assignments and eventually civilian life, she would reflect on that morning in the Afghan forest as the defining moment of her military career. The engagement had tested every aspect of her training and personal character, and she had risen to meet the challenge. The knowledge that 12 elite warriors had gone home to their families because of her actions provided a sense of purpose and accomplishment that would sustain her for the rest of her life. The forest ambush became part of military legend, a story told to new recruits about the difference one skilled soldier could make in combat. Maria's name became synonymous with precision under pressure and the kind of heroism that didn't seek recognition, but simply did what was necessary when others were in danger. Her rifle had spoken 18 times that day, and each shot had helped write a story of survival, courage, and brotherhood that would inspire future generations of warriors.